All right, so let us move on, and we'll go right over to Marvel on TV. This past week, we had Marvel. You know, we already know a lot about Daredevil. Well, not a lot, I should say. Although Daredevil's coming to New York Comic Con, where we're hopefully going to see some footage and learn more.
And Vincent D'Onofrio has been on a lot of Robert Downey's tweets lately.
Yeah,
they're in a movie together, and they're in this movie, The Judge. And you can see D'Onofrio has his head shaved and everything. So if you're curious what he'll look like as Kingpin, just go on Robert Downey's Twitter.
It's out there. And Stephen DeKnight, who's executive producing Daredevil, the Spartacus alum, had some quotes this past week. He was talking about his approach to Daredevil, and he said that he wanted to make it grounded, gritty, and as realistic as we could portray. And he talked also a lot about the Frank Miller stories, and how that had not just the fact that, he didn't bring up the fact that, Kingpin, Elektra, and Bullseye. He brought up the tone, and that it was much more morally gray. He had a specific example of a scene.
Catholic angst.
Yeah. And he had an example of a scene where Daredevil kind of let a criminal, fall, that was much more not portraying Daredevil as a paragon of virtue, but much more sort of dark figure.
So that excites me for, the Marvel movies we both love. This is not a criticism. It's just an observation that they have a specific tone. All those movies have the exact same tone, the exact same sort of tempo, really. And this would allow for more, I'd say, probably a little bit more nuanced exploration of these types of characters.
Yeah.
If the Marvel movies were afraid to do the Demon in the Bottle storyline, if Iron Man had been a Netflix series instead, he'd be down at the bottom of that,
right.
the bottom of that bottle by, the end of season 1.
Yeah, I feel like, 'cause I did feel like Winter Soldier was different.
Oh, yeah.
Winter Soldier's tonally was different. But yeah, most of their movies are definitely, the humor is integral, and we love them. Yeah, they're great. And they're overall very entertaining and very fun, and the characters are really good. I mean, that's the thing about, within the humor you get a lot of great characters, but they're not going to go for the darker, more edgy stuff most of the time.
Yeah.
And I am very intrigued and hopeful that maybe all these Netflix shows, and Daredevil being the first, is...
Well, they don't have to worry about the rating. They could have somebody show off their bare ass. They could have, I'm curious to see if the kills are particularly bloody, especially if you bring in somebody like, Bullseye or eventually Elektra. And this was something we had chatted about a little earlier, but they still haven't said who Rosario Dawson is playing. And it's whereas everybody else is listed in the press releases. So I'm curious why the secrecy on that. But if her character is allowed to be violent at all, will we start seeing will there be blood?
I see. I don't think it'll be R-rated. To that extent, but I do think, I just read an interview with Jeff Loeb that kind of asked him that question about, hey, it's Netflix, there's the opportunity clearly there to push it a little more, and he basically said, I think you'll be happy, he's always going to play coy, but it definitely sounds like they understand that this is not ABC, this is not trying to be sort of a family show like S.H.I.E.L.D. is.
Yeah.
Even just the nature of Netflix, the fact the same Loeb interview talked about the fact that they know that so many people are going to binge watch this and watch all 13 at once.
But they could also, they do exist within the same universe as any of the film properties and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah. No.
So could there ever be any sort of potential crossover with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Could Coulson show up?
I think that they at some point will. I think right now we know that we know that this is going to connect to these other 3 Marvel shows that'll all lead into Defenders. So there'll be a lot of probably Easter eggs, and not Easter eggs even, of seeding. Of having a supporting character in Daredevil, then maybe move over to Iron Fist or something that. But I feel like, you do, Roth and I were talking recently about how there's a lot of things S.H.I.E.L.D. had to do to sort of right itself, but one thing I do want to see at some point is a character originated on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. pop up in one of the Marvel movies. It will just help kind of reinforce that connection.
Yeah.
And I do think, that they'll want to do some connection, and they have such a big universe now, and they have a lot of characters to lean on that, you could have, whether it be, Maria Hill or something like that.
Yeah.
A character that could,
or
sort of
even
pop
like
up.
couldn't you have Don Cheadle's Rhodey show up in some capacity on one of these things? A name person, a recognizable face, but somebody whose appearance wouldn't necessarily throw a huge wrench into whatever movie continuity they're trying to do.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. Is it me, or is the Marvel Netflix stuff taking a lot longer to kind of get off the ground than was expected? I mean, the fact that they've only cast and are shooting Daredevil, and we've not heard anything about casting on Luke Cage, on Iron Fist, on Jessica Jones.
Well, they've implied you're going to hear Jessica Jones next.
Okay.
So I think they're just doing one at a time. I think that they've,
Do you think that who Rosario's Dawson's
No,
from?
I don't think so. And who knows? It's possible, but I don't think so. But I think the whole idea is that they're going to probably shoot these shows back to back to back to back. They did this big announcement. We're filming in New York. They're going to have this New York crew. So I don't think you're going to see them shooting 4 shows simultaneously. I think the whole idea is because they were like Daredevil's first and then Jessica Jones. We don't know the exact lineup after that. And they've implied that we're starting to do casting for Jessica Jones. So I think we're going to hear her casting by the end of the year, and that'll shoot next. And so then I think by the middle of next year, maybe a lot will be happening. Like we'll start.
I'm curious, as somebody who Jessica Jones was not a character I was overly familiar with. I think she was a little bit after my main comic book reading time. But what sort of storylines does she have that could kind of carry an entire season?
I mean, a lot. But again, I'm so glad this is for Netflix, again, with the caveat being that I don't know how dark they're willing to go, but certainly I think more than ABC, because when that show was supposed to be at ABC, that was always a weird fit. Because Jessica Jones was it was a Max title. Max was Marvel's mature line.
That was like their answer to Vertigo?
Yeah, and it got super adult, the comic book, in a way that I never think they're ever going to go on a TV show. But
such as?
There was some explicit sexual situations.
Oh, well, look at that.
Her and Luke Cage in the very first issue, there was an encounter.
Damn.
Yes.
Right.
But as we go forward, you should read. I can even lend you the omnibus alias of Jessica Jones. Although I told Chris I'd lend it to him first. But there is some really good stories, especially her backstory, because the whole idea being that she is an ex-superhero and why it is that she quit being a superhero. And it's very intriguing, but super dark. And also something they have to handle delicately, because there is a part of it that could just come off as just being like kind of horrible and miserable for its own sake. Oh. But it involves a Daredevil villain. I will say that. They tied it again because they did the whole thing of the retroactive continuity of saying, even though you've never met this character, she was always around. She went to high school with Peter Parker, all this stuff in the comic books. And so they tied her in to the Avengers. Carol Danvers was her best friend, and she had this major incident happen with the Daredevil villain. That was very intriguing. So this is the kind of thing that you can see how far they were, if they get a version of that they could set up on Daredevil,
Do we know, is Kingpin really the only Daredevil villain that's going to be on the first season of Netflix? I mean, he had a lot of underlings. I mean, could we, or even like his son there, the Rose, like could he be part of it?
I mean, that's definitely a possibility. I mean, we should mention
the Owl.
You mentioned right before we started recording that there was new Daredevil casting today.
Yes,
big new casting, not a villain, but big new casting, which is Scott Glenn playing Stick. His mentor.
You might know him from Urban Cowboy.
Yes. Or The Leftovers on HBO.
Or Born Ultimatum.
Silence of the Lambs, yes. And
Born
Ultimatum. But yeah, so that's like a major, a pretty important character in Daredevil history that they are now announcing several weeks into production. So who knows? There's still room,
So it sounds almost kind of like they're doing like a Batman 89 thing where like he's already Daredevil and we're working backwards.
Maybe, yeah. If we're meeting
his origin.
Yeah. If you might be right. If we meet Stick several episodes in, then that sounds like a flashbacks. Right?
See, I kind of like that though. Yeah. I like that they that they're not going to, well, and we don't know this for sure, but like the Affleck movie. I know it's not quote unquote canon, but I think people at least get the idea of what this guy's origin is. So you just start off with this guy doing his thing, and then you can get into, once you buy him, you care about this character, and then you explain the sort of preposterous nature of, well, he's a blind guy who, get hit by
radiation,
and now he can, see outlines with his ears.
Before we move on from Daredevil, I just have to mention that the funniest thing with the Stick announcement was Marvel.com announced it, and they said Scott Glenn to play Stick, and then they put first live-action incarnation of this, important Daredevil character, and I was like, we haven't forgotten the Elektra movie, Marvel.
Starring Terrence Stamp.
You might wish we had,
yeah.
but we remember that.
Hey, they got General Zod to play Stick.
It was great casting, not a great movie.
Yeah.
Right? So.